Bears fans, happy Monday. Let's start this week off right. And if you're here on the CHGO Bears podcast feed, you're doing just that. As you know, CHGO Bears is presented by PointsBet. If you use the promo code CHGO when you sign up, you get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. I'm your host, Nicholas Moriano. I'm joined by Will DeWitt, who's in the bubble, our head of content and first baseman for tonight's CHGO softball game, Kevin K.
That's breaking lineup news.
Hey,
I didn't know
right.
that. Okay.
Who are you guys playing tonight? That's my old league.
Where's Kevin at?
We're playing
Kevin is
WGN
producing
Radio
right
and CHGO Sports / WGN Radio guy Kevin Wells.
All right. This should be an interesting game. We need to win. But in making his CHGO Bears debut is our special guest for today's show. He's a sports historian and Bears historian for our good friends at Windy City Gridiron, Jack M. Silverstein. How you doing?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
Great.
I didn't know we were going to talk softball. Otherwise, I would have told you to add to my intro, 2-time Cup League champion. Chicago Now, 2013, 2018.
We're missing like the best accolade right there because we are trying to find our footing in this league right now, and we desperately need to win.
Where are you playing your short center fielder?
We don't play a short center fielder
on a daily basis.
You guys go 4 across?
I also thought that was, an interesting. I think we might need a transition to the short center fielder. I think Silverstein agrees.
You have to have your short center fielder as kind of a roaming gapper. That should be your number 1 outfielder, positioned just behind short and kind of forming a triangle with center and left.
Okay.
Almost,
and then obviously a shift on lefties.
Right. Almost another infielder.
So are you retired now?
Yeah,
you want to come out and manage?
Yeah, we're
player manager.
Players.
I am retired. I was on the Chicago Now team from 2011 to 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Co-manager 13 to 16, somewhere in there, and I was commissioner of the league for 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
Wow. Well, now the more you know. The more you know.
Yeah.
And we have a
Cup
game
league
tonight.
for life.
We'll see what
Dirt
happens
Angels.
there. Will, this is like our 5th podcast in a row together. It's like, reminiscing on old times. How have you been?
I'm doing good. I feel better than I did on Friday. I spent the weekend feeling a little ill. I actually woke up today and I thought it was Sunday. And I thought Kevin knocked out her newsletter a whole day early. And I was like, damn, that's awesome. I'm just sitting there. I'm like, wait, is it Monday? It is Monday. So a little bit of a late start to the week, but I'm feeling good.
Glad to hear you're doing better. I know you're a little ill, like you said, going into the weekend, but glad you're here. And we have a full cast here for the CHGO Bears podcast, which is always great to start the week off on a Monday. Before we get into some serious discussion about potential Bears Hall of Famers, Joey, I think I sent you a clip that I just want us all to react to real quickly. Pretty local for me. It's like maybe a 10, 15-minute drive to Kenosha from where I'm at. But I don't know if you saw this, Jack, over the weekend, and it does involve a Green Bay Packer. A.J. Dillon. Mm-hmm. Here, and this poor Kenosha Kingfish mascot. 6 million views.
Oh, Jesus.
God.
Whoa.
Lost the head.
What I've noticed is if you look, he's already struggling to keep the head on. He's got to hold it right here when he's standing up, and then it immediately is coming off.
And you can see A.J. Dillon. He's already in a stance where you're looking at the mascot. Yeah, he's already charging. God. He's barely standing up, and then decapitation.
So,
right
so for the podcast crew, if you're not watching this, you've probably already seen the viral clip. It's A.J. Dillon just knocking the
crap out of
snot out of the Kingfisher mascot. When I watched this, it reminded me of, I don't know if you guys remember this, Randall Simon.
Oh yeah,
the Pittsburgh Pirates
taking
first
the bat
baseman.
into the sausage.
Taking the bat to the sausage. I think that's probably been 15 or 16 years ago already.
It was right before we traded for him, so it was 03.
That's right. It was the same season.
Yeah.
I think sometimes people forget that there's actually people in these things, and I think this was the case.
Yeah, they did a whole story on him on The Athletic now too. So I mean, hey, it happens when you get trucked by A.J. Dillon. But
I feel like The Athletic actually caught up with the woman who was inside the sausage costume and what it was like 15 or 20 years later. What it was like.
There it goes. Well, just want to start off on a light note to show what happens if you're a potential mascot. But actually, before we get into this discussion about, again, potential Bears Hall of Famers, Jack, for our audience, I want to ask you a couple questions so they can get to know you a little bit. being a sports historian, what is it about history and the deep dives that you do, because you do a fantastic job, that has just gravitated you towards this specific type of field?
I've always been interested in history. I think part of that is an interest in lists. I liked just looking at full lists of things, particularly, when I was 10. What are lists of things that have happened annually for 25, 30, 50, 100 years before I was born? So I loved lists of Super Bowls. I loved lists of presidents. I love all of those types of things. And then part of it is that, Rick Tellender has been one of my mentors and a friend of mine for a long time. And he said one of the ways that he got into history was that he just got older. And all of a sudden, the things that he lived through were history. And that's how I feel now with a lot of this 90s stuff, is that it still feels fresh to me. But then I realize, oh, yeah, not everybody's spent 25 years thinking about Matt Stegenga and the 97 Bulls.
Man.
That might be something of interest to folks. So I think it's a combination of just a natural interest in history and then the aging process of realizing you've got this whole backlog of information that people who are younger don't have. I think that you really, more or less, I think you peak as a sports fan in terms of pure just passion and crazed emotion probably around 25, somewhere in there. I think you sort of start to really become a fan where you know what you're looking at 10. I think your peak starts probably around 15 or 16. Probably by 25, depending on where your teams are at the time, might go a little bit longer. As you get a little bit older, it becomes a little bit more challenging to muster that level of just pure emotion. Although I was a screaming mess when the Cubs won the World Series, and I was 30. I was just about to turn 35. So it still is there, absolutely. But I think that
it just takes you a little bit more. It takes ending a 108-year drought
Correct.
to kind of get that going for you.
Correct.
I will say, I think a big part too is once you kind of have kids, that changes the equation a little bit. It doesn't matter as much anymore, the wins or losses, when you've got a family to take care of.
But I had to explain to my daughter during the double doink why
Daddy was saying those words.
Screaming. I had to explain then 2 years later during the Saints playoff game, particularly on the reverse pitch. I don't even want to bring up dude's name. It was very unfortunate, but you know what I'm talking about. Back of the end zone, boop.
Yep.
And I had to kind of explain to her, Daddy is mad, but he's not mad at you. Daddy is saying bad things, but he's not saying them to you. Kind of maybe go play a little bit, and I'll be back. But then when the Sky won, that was her first championship. That was her first ability to understand, if you win a lot of games, they give you a trophy, and everybody's cheers, and that was very exciting. So that's a cool part of it as well. But the history is just so interesting. It's also a branding and career niche move, because you kind of start to say, all right, this is very competitive. What am I very good at? I'm very good at understanding history. I'm very good at tying the past to the present. That would be a good way to start to introduce myself more formally as I'm doing, shows and writing. And it was really probably the jump off was my Bulls book on 96 in 2016. It was a free PDF that I did on the 96 Bulls. That was the first opportunity where I could go on shows and talk to people with a sizable piece of work that people could refer back to. And then as you start to do more of that, you're like, all right, now I'm the historian. Now I got to do a little bit more, et cetera. So it kind of rolls from there.
Gotcha.
Jack, real quick, you're talking about all the different ages and the phases of fandom. And I was going through my own kind of recollection about the numbers that you're hitting on. And I think you're onto something here. When I was 15, 16, really into the Bears, so much so. And I know they were, in the Super Bowl around that time in my lifetime. So that does help. But then the last time I felt really into this team and buying in, cheering them on, 2018. And I was 25, turning 26. And of course, they haven't given me many reasons to cheer since then. However, that was the last big hurrah that I've had personally as well. So hopefully, if they turn things around here sooner rather than later, we can put this theory to the test. A little bit more about your background. Where did you go to school again? I just want to make sure we're on the same page here.
I went to Indiana University.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, absolutely. Wrote for the newspaper for 4 years, and went to National Louis University, got my teaching certificate. Didn't end up going into teaching, but love National Louis, so shout out to NLU.
Yeah, I had to throw an IU when I can in there. I don't get many opportunities on the show to have a brethren, someone else that went to the same school as I did, wrote for the same newspaper, and glad Jack's on, so I have this moment.
Oh, I was there for the Bob Knight firing. I was out there for the riot, I guess you would call it. It was the first time I'd ever seen riot police.
Yeah.
And it was
what up, Knight?
It was also when, yeah, exactly. It was also when I established my personal rule that if you are under 6 feet and in between a house and riot police, you move out of that space to the back of the crowd behind the police,
Smart idea.
which was the smart play, because then all of the tear gas started going off and people were just running and knocking into each other. We've been out all day marching and yelling, and it was madcap.
So you were there the last time the Hoosiers were any good at basketball, too.
I was a long-time pizza delivery guy, 8 years, and at that point I was working at Domino's.
Okay.
And the night that we beat Duke, it typically took me 6-7 minutes maybe to get from my dorm at the time to that Domino's pizza. I think it took about 45 minutes after that game ended. I remember being at a stoplight and the stoplight was shaking.
That's awesome.
And I looked up, and it was because there were just people hanging on it. I got the best tips of my life that night, and it was going off, and the Final Four was fun. That was a run. That was a good time.
That's awesome, Jack. Well, hey, we have some, like I said earlier at the top here, potential Bears Hall of Famers to talk about, and no better person to talk about it than you, Jack. And you actually have a couple pieces on Windy City Gridiron that we want to discuss here today. Kind of starting with Steve McMichael's surprising Hall of Fame case in 5 steps. For people who haven't read that yet, definitely go to Windy City Gridiron and check that out. But we're going to discuss it here on today's podcast. But Steve McMichael, obviously, we all know about his condition that he's in right now. But you and your article laid out in 5 steps. We'll just kind of start it from the top and kind of work our way down and kind of discuss what you kind of researched and, again, potentially the ways that he can get it.
Well, first update, like where he is in this process right now. He was on a list of 50 and then did not make it to the cut of 25.
He was on a hypothetical list. So
okay.
So right now what he's in is he's in the senior category. And the way that the Pro Football Hall of Fame works is you retire, you wait 5 years, and then you're eligible. It's called the modern era. When you talk about guys who are first ballot, Brian Urlacher, first ballot, Devin Hester, not first ballot. That's the modern era group. So you wait your 5 years, then you become eligible, and then you have 20 years of being eligible in the modern era category. Sam Mills this year, the late Sam Mills, got into the Hall of Fame on his final year as a modern era candidate, and there was a lot of chatter about that. The reason that is significant is that once you have been eligible for 20 years and you don't make it, you shift into the senior pool. And now it's kind of very much up for grabs because the number of seniors who are elected annually is much lower than the number of modern era guys.
Capped at 3 each year,
and that's expanded this year. It used to be 1 to 2. This year, next year, and the year after, there will be up to 3. They will vote in 3 for each of those years. You'll have 9, and that sounds great, except that there are 81 players who made all decade from 1920 to the 1990s who aren't in the Hall of Fame. There are, I think, 10 ex-NFL MVPs, not counting the all-decade guys. So take the 81, add 10 MVPs, add a handful of Defensive Player of the Year guys, Offensive Player of the Year guys, add new seniors who were just getting close toward the end, Joe Jacoby, who's a semifinalist, Steve Tasker, who's not a semifinalist, Mike Ken, who is a semifinalist, Everson Walls, who is a semifinalist. Then you've got I think the number one guy for me is Sterling Sharp, who because of his shorter career never made it into Canton, but that's shifting now where they're starting to honor guys with shorter careers.
He was a Packer, so I'm fine with that. Let's keep him on the out.
The Pro Football Hall of Fame was founded in 1963, so they were already 43 years into the NFL. and they had 17 players go in, players, coaches, and owners go in that first year, but you had this huge backlog that you had to take care of because the league had already been existing for 43 years. Then they put in the senior committee in 1972, but it still didn't really clear it out. Then you might have heard a couple of years ago in 2020, they had 10. They had this big class for the 100-year anniversary, so they had 10 seniors go in.
Right.
And there's still some guys who are eligible from that. They haven't gone in. So it's this huge collection of seniors, and we're Bears fans. We get passionate about Steve McMichael, about Jay Hilgenberg, about Wilbur Marshall, but every fan, like us, for every other team.
Jimbo Covert was in that 10 person?
Jimbo Covert was in that 10, as was Ed Sprinkle. So we had 2 of the 10, and every fan of every team and every writer for every team and every player for every team is doing exactly what we're doing. And they're sitting around, Cincinnati fans are sitting around talking about Ken Anderson and Ken Riley, and they've got beef because there's only one Cincinnati Bengal, not counting like T.O., there's only one Cincinnati Bengal in the hall, Anthony Munoz. So the Bronco fans are talking, and the Raider fans are talking. They all, by the way, think that there is an anti-West Coast, anti-AFL bias. The numbers bear it out. I don't know. We'll see. Whatever. But there are all these fans of all these different teams. They're all doing the same thing that we're doing. They're all comparing their guy statistically to this other guy. Yeah. They're all saying, well, you know, you've probably seen the memes, Zach Thomas and Brian Urlacher, or London Fletcher and Ray Lewis. And it doesn't matter if you say, yeah, but did you watch them?
Exactly.
It doesn't make a difference. Everybody wants their guy in. Sure. So these conversations are happening, and it creates this huge jam and a huge uphill battle for everybody, Steve McMichael included.
Now, Jack, just to kind of go, like, you talked about stats. It's not always the end-all, be-all, but that's the first kind of line that you go there, making the statistical case, including the surprise that McMichael was a defensive tackle sack master.
Yeah.
Out of all the stats that were kind of compiled in that section, is there one that kind of stands out to you?
There's a couple, and I never thought about Steve McMichael as a Hall of Famer at the time. He was overshadowed by, I think, some teammates who were more obvious, where their greatness was a little bit more obvious.
And still is in probably the mind of the average voter.
I agree, absolutely. And I think also because of his personality, there was more, you were a little bit more drawn to some of his rashness, his silliness, his turns of phrase, so colorful. But yeah, Dan Pompei wrote a piece on him, Rick Tellender wrote a piece on him, and I just said, all right, I gotta give this a shake and see what it is. I knew that he had 95 career sacks. When he retired, that was most all-time for any defensive tackle. It's currently, for Hall of Fame defensive tackles, if he were in the Hall of Fame, he'd be 8th. He's been passed by some guys who came after him, John Randall, Aaron Donald has already passed him. The sack totals were also extended recently from 1982, when they were an official number, all the way back to 1960. So now we know how many sacks Alan Page had. Now we know how many sacks Deacon Jones had. But he's still 8th.
Yeah.
That was a pretty big number. And the number that really got me was, he was only a 4-time Associated Press All-Pro selection.
Right.
Only twice on the first team. But I looked at the sack totals for his career, basically for when he was a starter, 83 to 93, which was his last year in Chicago. And during that time, he actually out-sacked the average AP defensive tackle. So Steve McMichael was averaging 8.2 sacks per year, and the all-pro defensive tackle for the AP, who were beating him out for that almost every year, 7.8 sacks. He's out-sacking the guys who are beating him out for all-pro. So when you start to look at that, you also start to consider what he did on this incredible defense. And I think that, and this was one of the points I made, the 85 Bears get knocked as a one-hit wonder, as an underachiever, as a team that is true. As a defense, you're talking about a unit that was finishing top 5 in yards and points allowed annually over the course of almost a decade. Several number 1 rankings. I mean, doing better than what we saw with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers of the 2000s, doing better than what we saw with the Ravens, doing better than what we saw with the Steelers, Steel Curtain, doing better than the Orange Crush, doing better than the no-name defense, doing better than all of these incredible defenses. And the 80s Bears were the team that was doing the best statistically, and Steve McMichael played the most games of any of those guys because he had his consecutive game streak. So one of the points I brought up is that, where is the bar? People will say, we can't have this many 85 Bears in the Hall of Fame. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Why
not?
Yeah.
And where's the bar? And certainly the bar is above the 2002 Buccaneers. The 2002 Buccaneers, they got
Really
Derek
good point,
Brooks.
yeah.
They've got Warren Sapp. They've got John Lynch. They're about to get Rondé Barber. I've said I think Simeon Rice should be a guy. So the 80s Bears have, obviously, Samurai. They've got Dent, Hampton. So if McMichael is 4, do the 85 Bears and the 80s Bears defense not deserve a 4th player when the Bucs are about to get 4?
Exactly. I see Nomad in the comments real quick, Will. I love Mongo just as much as the next Bears fan, but he ain't no Hall of Famer. We'll keep listening to Jack here, and I think maybe Nomad, that discussion will change here in a bit. But go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So in that article, one comparison that you made that I thought really does put things in a great perspective is McMichael versus that 49ers defensive tackle, Bryant Young, who was just enshrined. Can you share to our listeners some of that comparison and how McMichael stacks up compared to someone that already is in the Hall?
Yeah, so this can be a little bit dicey, and I wrote about that because you can't make a 1-to-1 of the modern era guys against the seniors. And because they played at a little bit different times, it's a little bit harder with the numbers. But if Bryant Young is now the bar, then Steve McMichael is a Hall of Famer.
Yes.
And even if he's not the bar, a lot of people would argue he is anyhow. Those 95 sacks, that's enough. That's enough. And it's not just one huge season. So Joe Klecko of the Jets had an incredible season. And I don't want to besmirch anybody. He had 20.5 sacks in 1981. He led the NFL. But he finished with almost 20 fewer sacks career than McMichael. Now, if you're going to talk about, say, Bryant Young and his incredible comeback from injury, and you're going to talk about guys who had a short career, Jimbo Covert, who had a short career because of injuries, Tony Baselli, who's now in, Terrell Davis, who's now in, Kenny Easley, who was a senior, Sterling Sharp,
Gale Sayers.
Gale Sayers. If you're going to argue that guys need to get the benefit of the doubt because football is a physical game and they got hurt, shouldn't that benefit of the doubt also extend to guys who didn't need that comeback, who were the Iron Men? And when I look at Steve McMichael versus Bryant Young, Bryant Young had a year where he finished, I think it was 4th in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. McMichael never got that close. But McMichael in 1988 had a better year all the way across the board, individual stats and team production, than Bryant Young did. And just because of the way things worked out, Steve McMichael wasn't even an All-Pro that year. Bryant Young was 4th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. And so you look at that and you go, oh, well, Bryant Young had this standout season. Where's Steve McMichael's? But you actually look at the numbers and you look at how he compared to the guys, at his position group. Steve McMichael was a monster in 1988.
So, I would say, had you asked me a year ago, my knee-jerk reaction would have been similar to Nomad, saying, okay, McMichael is a great player, but he's probably not quite at that level. Then after reading what Dan Pompei was able to put together, sitting here and listening to you put things into perspective as McMichael related to that time, seeing his name mentioned in the same breath with Aaron Donald and John Randall, to me that means just so much and really swings me the other way.
Yeah, I think another thing to consider is, and this is always the problem, and it's the problem in all sports, where do you draw the line between what you were able to do because of who you were versus what you were able to do because of the players around you? And there's never a way to fully pick that apart. Roger Craig is looking at that right now. Roger Craig is a senior semifinalist and a huge member of this incredible offense, and he hasn't gotten into the Hall of Fame yet. I think his odds are very good, and I think he might be going in this year if I had to handicap it. But you look at Steve McMichael. Steve McMichael was still still having big sack totals. One of his best sack totals was after Dan Hampton was gone. It was after Singletary was gone. So he was still doing it all the way to the end. I also looked at, you just try to like cut stats any way possible. And something that's just a reality now because of StatHead and all the reference sites, it is so much easier now to cut stats and find some kind of conclusion and say, oh, well, did you guys see the meme that said like, it was like Magic, Bird, LeBron, MJ, and Thaddeus Young were the only guys who had done that. And it was like 13.5 points and this many rebounds. And the reality was that Thaddeus Young was exactly at 13.5 points and whatever this grouping, I don't remember what it was. And it was like MJ's at 30 and Magic's at 12 assists and Larry's, and LeBron's doing his thing and everything. It was kind of a joke at that ability to go online now and cut stats however you want. And you can now say, oh, well, if you look at this, how many linebackers have had 20 interceptions and 15 sacks and 4 forced fumbles and finished top 5 and this and that. You can kind of do that all the way. But so one thing I was thinking of, you kind of have to apply a certain amount of common sense from your years of watching sports. So I was like, all right, what's a good sack season for a defensive tackle? 8 sacks.
Yeah.
8 sacks. Now, you might have a nose guard. You might have a nose tackle who's going to be lower, like Michael Carter for the 49ers. You might have someone who's explosive, like Aaron Donald. 8 sacks is a good season for a defensive tackle. And Steve McMichael is third all-time in NFL history for defensive tackles with seasons of 8 sacks. So he was steady, just putting them out year after year. If you also talk to guys, my guy Eric at Windy City Gridiron, he was, I think it was an assistant coach under someone who had, I'm messing the names up. Go to Windy City Gridiron and read the article, but it was at UCF. And his coach was a Bears fan and was telling him and everybody about specifically what McMichael was able to do and the bursts that he had and the way that he was able to take on blockers and a couple of different techniques that he was able to lock in and popularize.
Right.
One of the things we talk about with Charles Tillman is that they teach defensive backs how to play the position based on Charles Tillman, and it's not happening on TV with McMichael, but according to Eric, who was closer to the game personally than I was, it is happening in certain coaching circles. Like, this is how you play this position. And the fact with the 85 Bears, with that 46D, McMichael was a guy who was moving around the line. He was versatile. He was powerful. He was
And that was
fast.
different at that time, to be moving around the line like he was.
Totally different. So when you look at the numbers, when you look at the way people talked about him at the time, when you look at what his opponents say about him, it paints a different picture than maybe we even realized watching him in real time.
And now I think Nomad's coming around.
What does Nomad
to
say
it,
now?
Too. He said, but based on what this guy is saying, Jack, I can respect the argument. So at least we've got people already turning as it's going. We're going to pick up on this discussion, and you actually mentioned a couple players that we want to talk about later. But the best way to support CHGO is to download the PointsBet app and use code CHGO when you sign up. If you do that right now, you'll get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000. That's not it. If you make a $50 or more first-time deposit, you'll receive a free CHGO membership, which unlocks all of our web content, and you'll even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. That's $2,000 in free bets, a free CHGO membership, and a free t-shirt from the CHGO locker, all for making more than a $50 first-time deposit at PointsBet. If you have any questions, you can email pointsbet@allchgo.com, and we'll help you out. Your home for live in-play betting just got even better. See an edge in the game you are watching? Is your favorite team primed for a comeback? Don't just watch the game. Bet along with it live. More live betting, more live markets, and faster live cash outs. Follow along with your bets the moment they hit and stay in the live action all game long. Download the PointsBet app right now and use code CHGO. So what are you waiting for? It's time to elevate your live betting game. Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER for crisis counseling and referral services.
Our next partner is a product that I literally am starting to use more and more often. Not every day yet, Nick, like you, but I'm using it more than I ever have before, and that's AG1. I started taking it because, well, with a baby, I'm learning the more importance about gut health. And honestly, I need some extra energy around the house as well. So what is in this stuff? With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source, superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. Literally, like all of the things. It's lifestyle friendly as well. It supports better sleep quality and recovery, mental clarity and alertness. And on top of the health facts, it's also very sustainable as well. Their company has some great economy values. Athletic Greens is a climate neutral certified company, and in 2020, AG purchased carbon credits that support projects protecting old growth rainforests. So good for your body and good for the planet. And right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every single day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. So to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you 1 free year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. And all you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/CHGO Bears. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/CHGO Bears to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance.
Thank you, Will. And Jack, you mentioned a couple players that I want to discuss here in terms of the Lovey Bears.
Okay.
That may have a chance here. And you mentioned a player that we probably hear his name every Sunday, Charles Peanut Tillman.
Yeah.
Right? As a guy that, everyone's learning now the peanut punch. Matt Eberflus has brought Charles Tillman in to speak with the current Bears to kind of discuss what it means to be a Bear, but also probably to learn that technique on that punch and why it was so valuable. But with him, what's kind of like your vision? Like, what are you seeing out of him and his potential of being a Hall of Famer?
Yeah, so Charles has a good case. He has a tough case. And one of the reasons for that is that when you're first, you don't get the respect and you don't get the attention that you get once a template has been formed. The next Charles Tillman will be getting Pro Bowls and All-Pro selections for the same things or less than what Charles was doing.
Yeah.
Because at the time, when he was playing, it was all about interception numbers. And every year, there was someone who had a huge interception season and then who kind of fell back. And D'Angelo Hall, Nate Vasher, who I love, but Nate Vash had that 2005 season, 8 interceptions. Charles was just steady, 3, 5, 4, 2, 1, but at the same time, the forced fumbles and taking the ball away. In his career, the only person who had more forced fumbles than him was Robert Mathis. I think you have to drop down 10 forced fumbles to get to the next DB, and it's Charles Woodson. And the way that he was able to create this pressure, create these turnovers, we also saw what he did against elite wide receivers. Take a look at Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson set an NFL receiving record in 2012, and I think 2 of his 3 lowest receiving games were against Charles, including his worst, which was 34. I think it was 34 yards on 3 catches and no touchdowns. And they had that goal-to-goal stand where Peanut punched it out on. It doesn't get counted. It's not a forced fumble. That's one of my favorite Peanut punches.
I remember that
where
one.
he stopped Calvin Johnson at the goal line, going up top, man-to-man. Same thing that he obviously did with Randy in his rookie year. So Charles has a really hard road, and which is unfortunate. The way that I look at it is that the only guys who were definitively better than him were Champ Bailey, at his time, was Champ Bailey, Charles Woodson, and Darrelle Revis. So Bailey was first ballot. He's in. Woodson's in, first ballot. And Revis will go in soon. And to me, everybody else, we needed to take a big breather and have a conversation and look at everybody else. I will put Charles right up against Ty Law. I'll put Charles right up against Rondé Barber. I'll put Charles right up against Richard Sherman. And because, if XLI played out differently, we're having a lot of different conversations. I was just talking to the Windy City Gridiron guys about that this morning, and Jeff Burks. What's up, Jeff? And it would be very, very different. Them's the breaks. But I would put Charles up against any of those guys. And actually, if you take all of their actual takeaway numbers, the interceptions and the forced fumbles that your team actually recovered, Charles, I looked at it at one point. I mean, it's basically like Ronnie Lott, Charles Woodson, Rod Woodson, and then Peanut in terms of most takeaways. Now, that doesn't say everything because there was a reason guys weren't throwing at Deion. And we all watch Deion.
Exactly,
we know what Deion was. It doesn't matter how many interceptions he actually had. But I think that Charles rates very well against any of those guys. Charles is someone who might make it all the way through without even getting to the finalist stage, and then all of a sudden could pop up as a senior when you start to reevaluate and reassess, because that's what that senior committee is really good at. One of the things that you should know, there's 49 voters for the Hall of Fame. There's only 12 voters for the senior committee. A lot fewer opinions, and one of those opinions is Dan Pompei.
But it's still from the same electorate, correct? It's not former players or whatever. In baseball, it's a completely different committee where they might be a little bit more open to Ron Santo or a Harold Baines coming in. That's not the case with football?
That's not the case. So it's 12 guys who are all part of the regular committee. And then there's a separate contributor and coach committee who are all part of the regular committee.
So it's great having Dan Pompei in your corner. I mean, that guy, his presence in that room and his stature among pro football writers is unmatched.
Correct.
And it's a big part of the reason probably Brian Urlacher was in on first ballot. It's probably a big reason why Steve McMichael might get a bigger shake. But will Dan be around on that committee, still in that role, once someone like Peanut Tillman comes up? I think that's a big question.
You don't know. And from talking to the guys who have studied the Pro Football Hall of Fame process longer than I have, one of the reasons that there's no rhyme or rhythm or reason to the seniors, more so now, but there wasn't before, was because it was only 5 voters and there was more rotation. So just because you got to a certain stage or just because your candidacy was strong one year, the people who were making your case might no longer have been there. And that also serves to facilitate this backlog. I think the good news, to put a button on the McMichael thing, for anyone who wants to know, all right, what happens now? Where does his case go?
Yeah.
Is there a way that I, as a Bears fan, not me, but us, can advocate for him? And there is, and it's about knowing his case very strongly, sharing the articles that people have written about him, sharing the videos. And it's important to know also that just because Steve McMichael never made it to a semifinalist round, much less a finalist round, that doesn't knock you out. 13 of the 25 semifinalists right now, the senior semifinalists, never reached that round.
So I think it sucks because of the way that ALS works. I mean, there's 100% chance that if Steve McMichael ever gets into the Hall of Fame, he is not going to be here to see it. That would put him in the same category as Ron Santo not being around to see it, Minnie Minoso not being here to see it, Dick Allen, whenever he gets in here, won't be around to see it. Like, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and that's something that happens with everyone, but gosh, ALS puts a much different clock on this. One of the things I looked at was that over the past 20 years, I think it was 36 seniors who have been elected waited 18 years to get in. So the life expectancy after diagnosis of ALS is 2 to 5 years.
Look, I take ALS out of it. The life expectancy of someone who played the NFL isn't that long.
Correct.
So it almost says to me, like, okay, you have to look at this process and say, is this being done in an expedient manner for the men who actually achieved this to actually be around to enjoy it?
That is something that I asked guys who, again, have studied it longer. One of the examples they pointed out was a couple of years ago, it was Jerry Jones versus Pat Bolin for the contributor spot. Bolin was in ill health. They knew that. They voted Jerry Jones. Pat Bolin was elected in, I think it was February of 2019, and he passed away in the summer of 2019. They historically do not take age and health as a factor.
That's unfortunate. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah, I mean, well, you guys mentioned Peanut, and I want to say that the one play that Jack mentioned on Randy Moss is a big reason why I'm here today. I was dancing around, fandom. I was only like 8, 9 years old, but that one play going up and pretty much mossing Moss and ripping it away up there in the air, like, to me, still one of my favorite Bears memories of all time. And like I said, a big reason why I'm here today. And
did you know that that's a Randy Moss card?
Is that right?
It's a Randy Moss card.
Yeah, someone shared that with me a few years ago. It's a split second before the actual pick. The Peanut Tillman pick on Randy Moss is a Randy Moss football card.
Can you find that, Joey?
That is
Joey's
that's
gonna go to
great.
work.
That is great.
I want that card.
You share that, Will, though, and what that means to you as a Bears fan. And obviously, Jack and I are the Bears fans that we are because of what Steve McMichael and others did. And to me, it almost underscores the importance of having like a Ring of Honor, a Bears Hall of Fame, to make sure that Steve McMichael has his spot, Wilbur Marshall, Peanut Tillman,
Jay Hilgenberg.
Right. Who knows? I mean, I assume Devin Hester will eventually get in, but you don't know. So it's, to me, it's like, all right, if the Bears move out to Arlington Heights, you better have an awesome Hall of Fame like the Packers do.
Yeah.
Because that's, and I don't think the Bears really are hurting it for celebrating their heritage, but it would be nice to have that there, and even a spot in the stadium where I worked in Kansas City for 4 years, and they've got a great Ring of Honor.
Yeah.
And you look up and you see the numbers of everyone who played there, and we're great Chiefs, but maybe aren't in the Hall of Fame.
I did a piece a few years ago arguing that one way to do this would be that the Bears should, after 50 years,
I love that piece
unretire numbers and put the initials of the player on the sleeves, and then that opens it up for, well, a lot of guys: Dent, Hampton, Urlacher, Briggs, Devin. And by the way, I looked at, historically speaking, Devin Hester is going to be in the Hall of Fame by 2027. So I'm not even talking about him anymore.
I like that.
He's a lock. But I loved that idea because part of what happens when you go to Bears games, when you're little, right, and you see someone wearing that 23 jersey, and, you'll tell your kids, oh, that was Devin, or then you say, that was Jerry Azuma. But when Jerry Azuma was playing, my parents were like, oh, that was Sean Gale. And, when Sean Gale was playing, they were like, the little corner on the 63 team, the little white guy who went to the Saints. I'm forgetting his name. But you kind of have that every generation thing. And with some of these guys, Bill Hewitt, 56, that hasn't been in circulation, for any of us. Bill George has 61, hasn't been in circulation for any of us. George McAfee, 5. This hasn't been in circulation for
George
any of us.
Hallis. No one even knows George Hallis had a number.
Right. So you kind of lose some of that because you can't look down on the field. My mother would always, at Bears games, would be like, well, 55, that's Doug Buffone. And then a little later, she'd be like, well, 55, that's Otis Wilson. And we say, well, 55, that's Lance Briggs. You don't have any of that with 56, with 61, with 77. You don't have that. So I like the idea of unretiring a number at a certain point, obviously with Walter as an exception, or I think it's obvious, whatever, do whatever you want. But I like that idea as a way to further honor guys.
And when you do unretire it, like you made the point in the article, you do have an excuse to have a big brouhaha and reintroduce the people, write articles about it, have podcasts about it. I love that idea. Yes, 34 is forever retired.
For me, 34 is forever retired. But I was on Sports Feed when that story dropped, and I asked Jarrett, how would you feel if in whatever the year was, how would you feel if they unretired your father's number? And he was like, you know what, when I first read this and I saw it, I was angry, but then I thought about it. Maybe it would be okay. And it's like, he's the one untouchable. And everybody else up for grabs.
Yeah. Jack, you put a lot of emphasis on Briggs when we were kind of mentioning some
did.
guys. And
you picked that up.
Yes, I did definitely pick that up. I'm sure our listeners did too. And we'll get to that right after.
Look, there's the card.
Oh, there it is.
Look at that.
Wow.
Look at that. Charles Tillman is on someone else's card. And
Will DeWitt just purchased the card on eBay. This is no longer up on eBay because it is on its way to Indianapolis.
Way to
we'll
go,
put
Will.
it right on the table here.
It was 99 cents. I had
That
to do
is
it.
too funny, though.
It's a must.
Probably $5.99 shipping.
I flipped out.
handling.
I don't remember who sent it to me, and I'll find him and I'll retweet it. But oh man, they sent that to me. I flipped out. I was like,
you
that's
don't know what
incredible.
happens after this, do you? Because it definitely want to be on a
keep
card.
going, sir.
Before we get to a discussion on Lance Briggs, just got to tell all of our listeners again about PointsBet. If you enjoy CHGO, one way to help us to continue to grow is to download the PointsBet app and use code CHGO when you sign up. Not only are you going to get 2 risk-free bets up to $2,000, but if you make a $50 or more first-time deposit, you'll receive that free CHGO membership, which unlocks all of our web content. You'll even get a free shirt of your choice from the CHGO locker. you have any questions, email pointsbet@allcho.com, and we'll help you out. And in case you missed it, online sign-up is available in Illinois. You can actually download the PointsBet app right now and register your account from start to finish, all from your phone. So what are you waiting for? Once the game starts, don't just bet. Live your bet life with PointsBet. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-522-4700. All right, this is CHO Bears podcast, and we're going to pick up this discussion on Lance Briggs because before we even went live, Jack, you were telling me, like, hey, I have some strong feelings about this discussion on Briggs. You were talking with some of your guys at Windy City Gridiron about it. Where's your head at on Lance Briggs and just the discussion that you had and just, again, his ability to potentially make the Hall of Fame?
His ability to potentially make the Hall of Fame is tough. It's going to be a very long road ahead. He has a really tough road for different reasons than Charles. But what I want to always kind of keep people thinking about is that for the majority of Lance's career, I don't know about you guys, but I thought of him as future Hall of Famer Lance Briggs. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you watch someone and you think about him that way, it becomes easier to say, oh, well, this person should be in the Hall of Fame. I've been thinking about him as a Hall of Famer since 2004 or 2005. And that was the way that we thought about him. That was the way I thought about him. I don't know about you guys. Was that your experience?
Yeah, I mean, when I was watching especially next to Urlacher, I'm like, these guys are both making all these plays on the field. Like, this guy will eventually get in. And then, you see the discussions that are happening elsewhere, and then you're like, oh, I guess I was wrong about that. But I've always had that feeling that he would eventually get in.
I'm in a group. It's a mock Hall of Fame committee. And we do the Hall of Fame voting in the same rounds that the Hall of Fame does, and then we do like our own. And then once there's an actual list, like we vote on our list and we vote on their list. And it's a really cool group because it's people who've been studying this a long time, and it's a whole mix of teams. There's 2 Bears fans, there's 2 Broncos fans. We have Patriots, Cowboys, Saints, sort of like Giants, Jets combo. A number of different guys. And I remember like last year, I was going to push certain guys, and I got them on the Tillman thing. And so much so that Tillman was one of our semifinalists. And then, so maybe this was 2 years ago, and then last year, I had to miss the initial meeting, and Tillman still ended up in the semifinalists because the argument...
Because of the work you had done.
Yeah, but also because everybody understood the argument. Mm-hmm. It was very easy now to say, oh, I get it. Forced fumbles, I hear his name every week. I hear his name in NFL broadcasts. I hear his name in college broadcasts. Yeah. I hear his name in high school reporting. Mm-hmm. I understand. I tried to pitch them on Briggs. It was like silence, and I don't think he got any votes other than me. I don't even know if the other Bears fan voted for him. I don't remember. I'm sorry, Jeff. Different Jeff. But the thing with Lance was, and what makes it hard for him, is that because of his position in the Tampa 2, he wasn't a sack guy. Yeah. And the outside linebackers who are going to have a great shot at Canton, or guys who we know are going in, DeMarcus Ware, we know is going in, sack guy and Super Bowl champ. Terrell Suggs is going to go in, sack guy and Super Bowl champ. James Harrison, maybe not. Good sack numbers, around 90. Defensive Player of the Year, which Suggs also had. I don't remember if DeMarcus Ware had one, but DeMarcus Ware is DeMarcus Ware. Mm-hmm. We know what he is.
Yeah.
Von Miller, Super Bowl MVP, sack guy, 2-time champ. Yep. Who knows how this will go with Buffalo? Could be, he could be back in the mix as well. That outside linebacker spot became defined by how well can you get to the quarterback? Are you an edge rusher? And that's not what Lance was asked to do. So he's got huge tackle for loss. He's got a great breadth, statistically speaking, of figures, the interceptions, the touchdowns. He can get into the end zone. 5 pick sixes, another off a fumble that Peanut forced against Indy. His numbers stack up pretty well against Derek Brooks, who was the benchmark of that position. He's not Derek Brooks, but he's the next guy. But that's going to be the problem for Lance, is that this has become, this whole conversation for OLBs, all about sacks. And that just wasn't what he was asked to do.
So that's a good segue into a question that I wanted to ask. If you're watching the YouTube podcast, I'm wearing an old Khalil Mack Attack T-shirt from Breaking T. He was a guy when he came into Chicago, you thought, okay, here's the next great Chicago linebacker. Here's the next guy. He might be on the linebacker Mount Rushmore for the Bears. He's probably a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame. Now that he's onto the Chargers and didn't have a great finish to his career here, what's your gut reaction? Is he a Hall of Famer?
I think he still is. I think that there are kind of two levels of where you can be as a Hall of Famer. One is, like I said, I always thought of Lance as future Hall of Famer Lance Briggs, but I don't know that Lance ever passed the bus test. And the bus test is, if you get hit by a bus right now and you can never play your sport again, are you a Hall of Famer or are you not a Hall of Famer? Right now. That's what I call it. I call it the bus test.
How'd you come up with just like the bus test?
Just if you get hit by a bus, man, that's it.
Okay.
You know, it's not like too morbid. You could live, I guess, but
I don't know if Mac passes that test right now. I really don't.
So here's the other part. I think for me that once you reach a certain peak, that's it. That's kind of what stays in the minds of voters. It's like Kenny Easley.
Yeah.
Kenny Easley, 1984, Defensive Player of the Year, awesome with the Seahawks. Bunch of All-Pros, only played 7 seasons. And at the time, they weren't voting in these guys with short careers unless you were truly transcendent, like Gal Sayers, who, by the way, when the NFL had their 50th anniversary team in the start of the 69 season, Sayers 65, 66, 67, 68, 4 years. In 4 years, Gal Sayers was named to the 50th anniversary NFL team. It was him and Jim Brown as the backs.
Wow.
Yeah.
4 years. So
it's kind of like when they did the top 100 for the NHL and like Duncan Keith, Patrick Kane, and Jonathan Taves somehow all found their way on it.
Yeah. So to me, I think Khalil Mack reached that level. I think he had that amount of dominance. What he did in Oakland, what he did that first year here, and the way that, I wrote a column that he should have been the MVP of the season in 2018. That was just my view. I'm a historian, but I'm also a meathead. Like, I'm sort of both.
I love Mac. He's the only guy that he's the only person that I immediately bought their jersey upon them arriving, getting traded here or being drafted. I still haven't bought a Justin Fields jersey. I still want to wait.
The jersey test. That's another key test.
Khalil Mack, right away. I was like, that went on sale. I was probably one of the first 50 people in an NFL shop to buy one. So.
Yeah. My only adult Bears jersey was a Marcus Robinson jersey that I got in 2000. And then he went to Minnesota, so I had to closet it, sort of. But I would still wear it to Soldier Field. I remember
you should have worn it today.
I remember some guy dogging me out in the men's room at Soldier Field, and Vikings. And I was like, all right, man, give me like a few years, like it's gonna be all good. But yeah, who passes the jersey test?
Yeah.
Khalil Mack passed the instant jersey test.
Oh, for sure.
So yeah, I think he's gonna go in as well. But again, he's got that advantage. He's got the sacks. He's got the defensive player.
I think he could acquit himself rather well by helping this Chargers team to a Super Bowl.
Well, that locks
will
him.
elevate him. Yeah. But Will, you had a good point though that as we're kind of discussing these outside linebackers.
Yeah, no, Jack, you're talking about how now the Hall's looking at outside backers and getting after quarterbacks. Those sack numbers are starting to kind of take paramount. And I just wanted to mention like how unfortunate that is, because the NFL over the last decade plus has changed to that more 3-4 mentality where those outside linebackers are now edge rushers, unlike Lance. And you would just kind of hope they would take that into consideration, like the different roles that linebackers would play in those different defenses. But I could also understand when, people care about sacks so much and they see that position changing to it, where guys like Lance were kind of at that tail end of that Tampa 2 defense in Chicago before it lost some popularity around the league, kind of falling to the wayside. I just think it's just very unfortunate that it's ended up being the case.
Yeah, and that's funny. That's sort of how it goes, where when the style of play changes, you start to reevaluate. So Roger Craig, for example, now you're in an era of of these backs who need to be able to catch, and line up wide and run the football. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Roger Craig, first player in NFL history to have 1,000 yards receiving, 1,000 yards rushing in a season. 88 Offensive Player of the Year. He was the first player to score 3 touchdowns in a Super Bowl. All of a sudden, Roger Craig, from a modern context,
gets elevated.
He looks a lot better. Lance Briggs, from a modern context, doesn't look as good. But does that change who they were or what they did? No, of course not. So I would absolutely say I thought of Lance Briggs every Sunday, and I was like, this cat is a Hall of Famer, and so I would stay with that.
I've always seen too, like, you go into the depths of Twitter, you see a lot of crazy stuff, but like with Lance Briggs playing alongside Brian Urlacher, like, does that diminish what he did? And I never saw it that way. Like, obviously they need to be a tandem, and that's why they were both very successful. But
well, where did you? Because you're a little younger,
yeah,
than me. Where did you look at Lance when you were watching him, and like how he compared? Because I was comparing him to like a lot of guys who I had grown up watching, because Lance is a little bit younger than me. So this was the first generation of athletes where I was like, oh, I'm older than you now. So where did you compare Lance? Where did he fit in for you when you were watching every Sunday and being like, is this the best guy I've ever seen? I always say it's like when you watch The Godfather, you're like, there's no movie better than this. When you watch The Godfather Part 2, you're like, oh, wait a second, there's no movie better than this. When you go back to The Godfather, you're like, oh, never mind, this was better. But if you can even reach a point, so like Calvin Johnson for me is like Godfather 2. Like, when I stand back, I'm like, oh, you weren't better than Randy Moss. You weren't better than Jerry Rice. But when I'm watching him, I'm like, this is impossible. Nobody could be better than this. So, like, for you, where was Lance Briggs?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Sunday to Sunday.
Because I'm also thinking of the other inside linebackers that are playing during that time, too. Obviously, you're playing alongside Urlacher, but you also have, like, the Ray Lewises of the world. So it's like, he's not there,
Right?
but, man, he's still consistently, it's 54, 55, making tackles in the backfield.
Right.
So he was, for me, just kind of in that realm of being a productive playmaker that, when it's all said and done, I could see it happening.
We all agree
Jack.
if the Bears win Super Bowl 41, Lance Briggs is in, correct?
Yeah.
We all agree?
Probably,
There's
yes.
not a conversation?
Yeah.
Don, I was going to say, you mentioned the guy earlier for me, Terrell Suggs. Like, when I was watching back in the day, it was Urlacher and Briggs, Lewis and Suggs. Like, that was like the AFC, the NFC, like linebacking duos that, like, to me, like, stand out immediately when I reminisce.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, even they had Ed Reed behind him. And the Bears in that Super Bowl were playing without someone who I thought at his peak was on that level. Obviously, Mike, and we all love Mike. And, we were playing without him. We were playing without Tommy Harris. And we still had a shot to win the game. Thomas Jones, blah, 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 whatever. But, like, I mean, that's another one I think of. Like, when you talk about bad breaks, like, if we stick to the run, then we're feeding TJ. We might win that game. We win that game, Thomas Jones is Super Bowl MVP. Thomas Jones is Super Bowl MVP. We don't trade him. He retires as the number 2 rusher in Bears history behind Walter Payton. If he retires as the number 2 runner in Bears history behind Walter Payton, then Thomas Jones is now in all of these Hall of Fame conversations. Not for anything different that he did, but because he's a Super Bowl champ, he's a Super Bowl MVP. Do you know that he's the only player in Super Bowl history to get traded immediately after running for 100 yards in a Super Bowl?
Wow.
He's the only one. He told me that. I was like, oh, I'm sorry, bro. Man. But that's how those circumstances play.
So rings obviously matter, should they?
Yeah, I think so, and I think this is part of the problem. If you make the case that Steve McMichael was this key player on one of the greatest defenses ever and won a championship, then you can't turn around and say, oh, well, it doesn't matter if so-and-so, it doesn't matter, the Bears didn't win in 06. I think you have to look at the entire thing.
Right.
And, it's unfortunate. Like, I look at Richard Seymour, and I'm like, you're a Hall of Famer. Like, you held it down. You played multiple positions. That first, not a three-peat, but those first 3 New England titles were really defensive teams. But Richard Seymour has the benefit of playing with Tom Brady and under Bill Belichick, and Steve McMichael has the misfortune of playing with McMahon, who couldn't stay healthy,
Right.
and Mike Ditka, who is a good.
So what does it look like if they win in '86 and squeeze another one out?
If they squeeze another one out, then now you're looking at McMichael's in. Now you're looking at Wilbur's in. Now Ditka all of a sudden may be a Hall of Fame coach.
Yeah.
Although the Hall of Fame doesn't do that. They don't do 2 guys. You can't go in twice.
Right.
So like in the
Oh,
NBA,
okay,
like
yeah.
Lenny Wilkens is in as a coach and a player. But like Ozzie Newsome is like the greatest GM of all time, maybe. Like he won't go in as a general manager. John Madden won't go in as an announcer. They're already in. It's like you're in, you're in. But yeah, if they win another title, that whole thing is different. If the Bears win in 06 or in one of those J years down the stretch, 10, 11, 12, that whole thing is different. If the Seahawks give the ball to Marshawn Lynch, then Marshawn Lynch has 2 rings. He's a Super Bowl MVP with a 100-yard game and 2 touchdowns, a Super Bowl winning touchdown, and he's going to Canton.
Man, Jack, I just love how your mind works, how the whole Thomas Jones and where it could have been. But that's why you do the work that you do, and you're able to just relay history better than anybody I know. And I really appreciate you coming on today's show. I wish we had more time because there's so much more we can discuss with you. But it's been a pleasure, and I'm sure our listeners really enjoyed everything. And for all the people that were maybe hesitant on Steve McMichael and his Hall of Fame case, I don't know. You listen to Jack over here, and I think it changes a little bit of your perspective.
And I just want to say I see one person here who wrote, Hester should be in, no point in waiting for what? It is the process. But Devin Hester was a first ballot finalist last year. Statistically speaking, historical voting trends, he will be in by 2027. I've kind of clicked and moved on from Devin because that finish, especially as a pure returner, no pure returner has gone in. That finish was very significant. So everybody can be cool. Devin's going to go in, shift your attention to Lance, to Charles, to McMichael, to Hilgenberg, Marshall, automatic Jack Manders, whoever else.
Jack, I'm wondering. I'm just curious. I'll test your abilities here. Who was the NFL passing yards leader in 2008?
In 2008?
Yes.
Breeze.
God, that is impressive.
That
is so impressive.
Like, this guy's an encyclopedia, and boom, just right here.
That is incredible.
That's Jack M. Silverstein. You can follow him at ReadJack. See all
He's
of his
available
work.
for sports trivia hires.
Oh yes, you're gonna win that every single time. But go to Windy City Gridiron. You can check out all of his work, and you won't be disappointed because Jack does an incredible job. But I just want to thank everybody for tuning in to today's show. Make sure you're following us on social media at CHShow_Bears_sports. And we'll be back tomorrow at 1 o'clock for a remote show. But tune in to that and everything going on for the rest of the week. But until next time, bear down, Chicago.